from New Delhi, from Liberia. I think we have a critical mass now, Sulan, so over to you.
Thank you so much, Martin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 5th webinar of Let's Talk Plastics webinar series. For those of you who joined us for the first time, this is a UNDP webinar series focusing on plastics. And the purpose of the webinar series is to connect our colleagues around the world, facilitate global learning and sharing, and inform the development of UNDP plastics offer. So I work with a global task force to develop a UNDP's plastics offer and hope to gather their global intelligence to inform the development of this offer. Before giving the floor to Xiaofang, I would like to just mention some housekeeping matters. First, please keep your microphone muted during the presentations and put your questions and comments in the chat box on the right side. And the webinar, the presentations, and as well as the recording of this webinar will be uploaded to the Spark Blue. And the Q&A, or the questions we may not be able to answer, will be also answered after the session. So with that, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you and our distinguished panelists. And I'm very pleased to introduce Xiaofang Zhou, our Director of the Montreal Protocol Unit of UNDP. Xiaofang, over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sulan. Glad to meet all of you online. Welcome to join this UNDP webinar on plastic. I think we had a lot of discussion already, and today we will focus on the policy in the international, regional, and the national level. Everybody knows policy is very important. It could create an enabling environment to address the problem. And policy is also necessary. It's the most powerful policy is a ban, but I think in the plastic issue, we will need more policy in different levels and in different ways, but not only the policy like the ban, but also the economical instrument and others. I think today we will learn from our speakers, you know, they are involved in this policy development and discussion and negotiation, and that could be very helpful for all of our community to consider at different level. So I think first I would like to introduce the Madam Key from the BRS Secretariat. She's the focal point and the coordinator of the activities related to the plastic waste. In BRS also, you know, we all know they passed a very important policy on the plastic management on the treat. So please, I will over to the Key. Could you introduce?
Thank you very much for introduction, Xiaofang. So my name is Kei Ono. I'm with the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention Secretariat based in Geneva. And as I said, I coordinating plastic matters of the Secretariat. Xiaofang, did you wanted me to already start the presentation? Or?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, could we then show my presentation slide? Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Right, so plastic pollution is a global transboundary problem that originates at the local level, and the problem has increasingly captured political and scientific attention over the last decade. Plastic pollution has many negative consequences, as you know, including biodiversity loss, as plastics can persist in the environment for a very long time. And while in the environment, plastics can absorb POPs, persistent organic pollutants like PCBs, or also bacteria and viruses in its surface. And research shows that microplastics are found in fish that we eat or in water that we drink. Whether those plastics pose a risk for human health is yet to be confirmed. However, plastic additives such as brominated flame retardants and fluorinated surfactants, those are known to be toxic, and some are listed under the Stockholm Convention on POPs and could cause adverse effects on human health and the environment. Next slide, please. And solid waste management practices, as you know, in developing countries are highly heterogeneous, and it has greatly varying levels of treatment, low recycling rates, and a high share of illegal disposals. Incineration of plastic waste in open field is a major source of air pollution, including dioxins and furans and greenhouse gases, so those could have impacts on climate change. And as you might have heard, recent COVID-19 pandemic has led to a surge in the demand for plastic products, which is also affected by the drop in the price of crude oil. A drastic increase in use of single-use plastics, therefore, in addition to a decline in recycling, is further impacting the environment. Next slide, please. The problem should be addressed by a combination of global and local policies. And many governments have shown their commitment, maybe in the countries that you're working into, exploring innovative solutions, banning single-use plastics, promoting segregation at source, increasing recycling, introducing alternatives, etc. Next slide, please. And at the global level, various multilateral agreements or UN resolutions and voluntary commitments to address plastic pollution have been put in place, in particular since 2007. This slide is a little busy slide, but as you can see, there are several of such global agreements and voluntary initiatives that contribute to plastic waste pollution globally. So if you look at the green left top corner, those are the pollution-oriented agreements, starting with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, it's known as the UNCLOS, and other international conventions. I think London Convention, London Protocol, MARPOL, and so on. It has been there for many years, protecting marine environment from pollution. Then we have left bottom corner that relates to biodiversity and a Convention on Biological Diversity and the Convention related to species as well. There are also FAO Code of Conduct and IMO or related actions that are on voluntary basis but agreed among the global community. Then right top side, the orange bit, is the chemicals and waste oriented agreements, and the Basel Convention on Waste and the Stockholm Convention on POPs. They both also contribute to somewhat plastic pollution prevention. Then the bottom side is the regional instruments, and those are also very powerful instruments that are agreed upon at the regional level, regional seas conventions, and other Bamako Convention, Waigani Convention, agreed by set of countries at the regional level. And then in addition, there are, for example, G7 Action Plan, G20 Action Plan that have been recently negotiated. In terms of UNEP platform, we have the United Nations Environment Assembly, the forum where those important decisions are taken, has been the driving force for decision making. And then we all are aware that General Assembly also includes decisions on plastics, and SDGs relates to life underwater and sustainable consumption and production that relates to the plastic pollution. So we can see that there are several of instruments and voluntary contributions available, However, it has been analyzed that these are all not singly targeting plastic pollution, and this is also what is being discussed under United Nations Environment and Assemblies expert group, which I will be discussing shortly. Next slide, please. So here in this map, I have highlighted the presence of regional instruments in different regions, and also action plan that has been there, has been active since early 2000. And then recently, a number of global partnerships has been developed. The one that is in bold is the one under the Basel Convention, so I would like to advertise on that. But this is not just the only partnership. You can see global partnership on marine litter under UNEP, as it has been also supported by UNEA to have global and multi-stakeholder platform to address this marine litter issue. Next slide, please. Right, so under the UNEA resolution, this expert group called Ad Hoc Open-Ended Expert Group on Marine Litter and Microplastics was established in the UNEA 3. And since then, the expert group has been exploring the barriers and identifying the options, possible response options to address plastic pollution. And they are also examining the feasibility and effectiveness of different response options, and also to identify a range of national, regional, and international response options through stock-taking exercise. So this is another very busy slide. I hope that the presentations can be also shared with the participants to see a bit more details. Number one is to outlining the area where this expert group is exploring the barriers. And here the group has identified legal barriers, financial barriers, technological barriers, and information barriers. And then the group also took stock of existing activities and actions through survey, and this information is available on the website to public, so you can see who is doing what. And the Basel Secretariat is currently cooperating with UNEP to develop an online platform to share this information more widely, so that agencies that are trying to develop projects can see and to avoid duplication and enhance their synergies. And then the expert group also identified technical and financial resources and mechanisms, and analyzed that many of them are addressing waste management area. And then the group also looked at effectiveness of existing and potential response options. As you could see, that there are several existing mechanisms, but the status quo has been considered as not acceptable. It will not address this issue effectively. So they are looking at the options to improve. So in the last week, the ad hoc expert group concluded its meeting to have these different options analyzed, and they concluded that at this moment there is no one recommendation that will go to the UNEA, but there were strong opinions towards start negotiating about new international treaty. But at the same time, there are others preferring to strengthen the existing mechanisms. Next slide, please. So one development that I would like to highlight is, since in 2019, under the Basel Convention, a plastic waste amendment was adopted. And through this amendment, there are three new entries. The first entry, Annex 2, is to make plastic waste that are mixed and dirty plastic waste subject to prior informed consent procedure. That means that such plastic waste that are not readily recyclable, that needs to be agreed by the receiving country, or the receiving country needs to have capacity to manage such waste in an environmentally sound way. The second amendment is to highlight that this hazardous waste plastic needs to be subject to prior informed consent procedure. And the last amendment is to ensure the recycling of the clean plastics. Next slide, please. So therefore, the expected outcome of this, expected impact of this amendment is to still promote recycling, promote environmentally sound management, and also to reduce the generation of the plastics from the source. Next slide, please. And maybe you have seen in the news that the trade in plastics will have very big impacts on how the trade in the plastics have an impact on the generation and the flow of the plastics globally. And as you can see in the drop here in 2018, this was the year when China has banned the import of plastic waste, and that resulted in the movement of plastic waste into other countries. Next slide, please. And therefore, plastic waste issues could be tackled from different angles. And within the Secretariat, BRS Secretariat, we have done some brainstorming, and this busy slide here is what we have considered, what kind of interventions that could be addressed. But this exercise needs to be done by each organization. Next slide, please. Because then you can identify which intervention is most relevant and using your strength in the organizational strength. Here we can see trade and consumption, ESM, and so on has been identified as the area where BRS Secretariat is to focus. Next slide, please. And our main pillars here are indicated here. It's on transboundary movement to effectively control the movement of plastic waste. The second pillar is to improve the environmentally sound management. And the third pillar is to prevent and minimize the generation of plastic waste. Addressing the additives is also a very important area that we are focusing on within the BRS Secretariat. And the last slide, please. So here I was asked to summarize the recommendations on key interventions that could be done by UNDP. And as I was explaining in my previous slide, that it is very important to address this issue from the source. So one area that could be focused is on tackling source of plastic waste. And then, of course, waste management is indeed a very important area, and it has to be done at the local level. And the country presence of the UNDP would be a very strong point. And the trade, as you have seen in the diagram, has very strong impact in the flow of plastics, so that could be done. And finally, the hazardous constituents of plastics needs to be looked at, because that might have the strongest impact on human health. So thank you very much. Next slide, please. Yes, this was my conclusion of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay, for your very comprehensive presentation and also your recommendation to UNDP. We appreciate it. It's clear that the law, international law, will be very important for all of the nations to be compliant for that, and that's a fundamental, bottom line for all of the nations to take action. And we also see some kind of lines for the further development. We will learn from you if anything will come in the future. Thank you very much. The next speaker I would like to introduce to all of you is Dr. Rodolfo Lassi. And Dr. Lassi is the Director of the Environment Directorate of the Organizations for OECD. And he joined OECD in 2018. Before that, Dr. Lassi was the Vice Minister of Environment Policy and Planning at the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of Mexico. I think that he will introduce some development in OECD on plastic management. Please, I over to Rodolfo.
Thank you very much. I need to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this policy focus session of the UNDP. Let's talk plastics series. Now I will talk about the local arrangements that we have to have in order to deal with plastics. I'm pleased today to share with you some insights from the OECD's research on extended producer responsibility, and to discuss the possibilities for the policy tool as a means to mitigate the environmental impacts of plastics in developing countries. Next slide, please. The extended producer responsibility is a policy approach that can improve waste management that are mainly in charge of municipalities. We define EPR as a policy approach in which the producer's responsibility for a product is extended to the post-consumer stage of the product to the life cycle. In this figure, you can see that, this is a very well-known diagram. This is the foundation of what we are calling now the circular economy. And if we extended the boundaries of this very simple recycle concept, we will be talking about circular economy in a global perspective. Let's imagine, for example, the oil and gas industry. If they are extracting oil or gas to produce plastic, well, they must be responsible of the final product. So there are, of course, proposals to regulate these. And if the oil and gas industry wants to extract more gas or oil in the ocean, well, they have to remove first the plastic that is polluting the ocean. So it's a as I was saying, a straightforward concept, but it's difficult to implement. The OECD puts forward several main objectives for extended producer responsibility. And I would like to say that first, we have to shift the financial responsibility of waste management from municipalities to producers. Second, by implementing the producer's pays principle that is part of the legislation of the OECD countries, we can give incentives to producers to invest in design for environment and also commonly referred to as eco-design. In addition, EPR policies often contain targets or incentives that aim to increase recycling rates. We can do this as a mandatory instruction in the law, or we can have voluntary agreements with the industry. But for sure, we have to develop that framework in our countries to enhance the waste management, solid waste management systems at the local level. Next slide, please. EPR schemes are expanding rapidly. In this graph, you can see that within the OECD, most countries have introduced EPR systems for certain products categories. There are at least 384 systems in place globally, 2/3 of which have been implemented since 2001 in this century. And presently, the majority of EPR systems are in place in Europe and North America. Therefore, the policy tool has great potential for adoption in Latin American countries, in Africa for sure, and in Asia. Next slide, please. The increase of in EPR policies adoption has coincided with the decoupling of the generation of municipal solid waste and gross domestic product within the OECD, as you can see here. That is a slide depicting what is the OECD situation in this regard. From 2000, per capita municipal solid waste generation has reduced. Additionally, the share of material recovered has increased, while the share of material landfilled has decreased also. There are some lock-in investments, especially when we talk about incinerators. because, well, this is a very precious material for incineration purposes. The heat content, the caloric content of plastics is really high. Some waste streams are, of course, used in these incinerators. If the municipality is the owner of the incinerator, they will not move to a circular economy approach where recycling materials is the aim of the system, if they have economic interest in this lock-in investment. So this is a problem that we are looking in several European countries, for example. Next slide, please. The OECD has developed a guidance for EPR, most recently updated in 2016. The guidance identifies several themes of analysis that drive the design of effective EPR systems. EPR systems require strong governance to both enforce a level playing field and to enforce environmental standards and targets. EPR cannot be run by the private sector on its own. We can, of course, have a voluntary agreement with them, but there is a role in the local governments that they have to play. Transparency is paramount for effective government oversight. Competition and barriers to entry are also a concern and need to be addressed at the policy design stage. In Europe, several competition authorities have had to intervene into these systems to ensure fair competition. You have to remember the Gronepunkt experience. Competition impact assessments should therefore be carried out when EPRs are designed. The cost of EPRs to producers should be connected to the choice made in the design phase to provide incentives for design for the environment. Individual producer responsibility and fee and modulation are means for advanced systems to further internalize the design cost to the individual producers. For initial EPR implementation may seek to focus first in cost recovery. That's the principal objective. The recent increase in own sales or e-commerce, online sales is problematic as it presents an opportunity for firms to free ride. So now we have the free riders in the global market to enjoy the benefits of the systems without paying the full cost of the management of waste. We have a report that discusses possible measures to address this. So you can download our reports in our website. If you cannot do it, of course, I will be very happy to share it with you. Next slide, please. Now let us have a look at some particular issues in implemented EPRs in emerging economies. Compared to OECD countries, emerging economies have a long informal sector that is a basis for sustaining many livelihoods. An estimated of 20 million people globally work in the sector. They collect, sort, and recycle waste, and the introduction of EPR will necessarily affect these informal workers. In my country, in Mexico, this is a big problem. And the main, in my opinion, human problem with this is that there are children working in landfills, in open landfills. It is therefore important to carefully consider their potential role, the role of these pickers in the EPR systems. Empirical evidence shows that informal waste operators can play a highly positive role in waste collection and sorting. In fact, there is some evidence that informal operators collect more material than formal system when they run in parallel. And we have to be inclusive, and we have to incorporate them in the design of an upgraded waste management system. Conversely, informal operators can also generate several adverse impacts, including unsound processing of waste, such as open burning and chemical extraction that is associated with environmental pollution and health issues. You can see here, even in the country in the city where I live, in Paris, every night people are trying to collect materials from the garbage, and they are not protected, and they can be infected by the COVID problem because, well, they are not part of the system and they are not receiving the right equipment to do that kind of job. So failure to include the informal sector into EPR can undermine these systems, which has been the case for EPRs and packaging waste in Bulgaria, for example. Therefore, an inclusive approach is needed for the development of EPRs in countries with a strong informal waste management sector. The informal sector should be actively engaged in their development. There is a need to register waste pickers and then to work towards their formalization and professionalization too. There are some positive examples from Colombia and Brazil. Mexico is another good example where this was done successfully. Next slide, please. This is the last slide. Overall, we believe that the extended responsibility in combination with other policies, as we are saying here, it's an important tool that can help to mitigate environmental impacts of plastics in developing countries. So UNDP may want to consider dedicating more support to the development of these complex policy approaches, our local approaches that are necessary, sometimes are more difficult to implement than international agreements. And here at the OECD, we stand ready to support you, of course. In more general terms, the share of official development assistance, ODA, that is directed towards waste management is very insufficient. We have to say it very clearly. We estimate that in 2017, less than 0.3%, less than 1% of ODA was dedicated to the waste management problem. It's less than $500 million US. And this compares to an estimated 54 billion in investment costs and 18 billion in annual operation costs that we estimate will be needed to end ocean plastic litter. That's our estimations. So UNDP may want to prioritize waste management in its project portfolio and to work with its partners to increase this number. With this, well, I would like to thank you again. Can we put the next slide? Because I think that we have to consider, yes, the global international environmental regimes, but also the local challenges that our municipalities, our local authorities are facing right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rodolfo, for your presentation. So we know that the OECD always very active, you know, on the policy direction, and they develop a lot of effective policy in OECD country, and particularly on the waste management. We learned recently from some countries in the OECD, some Nordic country, and like also Switzerland, Germany, they really very good advanced to the zero waste region. They already achieved that, you know, to some extent. We learned some of the countries already have less than 2% of the multiple waste to the landfill, and even some countries achieved 0% of the landfill. That's remarkable achievement, and I think that all of the developed countries could learn from them. And EPR is I think EPR is play the key function in that. And in the plastic management, I also believe EPR is a very important measure to implement the policy, because that's something the key stakeholder how they contribute to this to address this problem. If without their support, it's difficult. So thank you very much. So next speaker, we will turn to Julie Cabello, and she is Director General of Environment and Climate Change, Rwanda Ministry of Environment. And you know that the Rwanda government, they launched a very impressive policy on plastic management. They banned those single plastic many years ago. So we want to learn the experience from their country. So I over to Juliet, please.
Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where we are all. I want to begin by appreciating the UNDP for organizing this talk on plastics. Let's talk plastics. It's a pleasure for us to share Rwanda's experiences and lessons learned from the ban of plastics. My name is Juliet and I'm the Director General of Rwanda Environment Management Authority. Next slide, please. Yes, the background. I think we started seeing plastics coming to Rwanda in 1980s. Before that, I think we didn't have this issue of plastics. We had other different materials to be used as for carry bags and so on. But in 1980s onwards is when we started seeing a huge influx of plastics. In 2003 is when the ministry started to see the negative impacts. They were becoming more and more. Plastic waste was becoming too much and it was affecting agriculture, productivity, and so on. So after that study was done in 2004, the government decided to ban plastic shopping bags. And here we went through raising awareness and educating people on the side effects, even when we didn't have the law then, but the government made that bold decision. So it was back and forth, trial and error. First, we thought we were going to ban the very small ones, the very thin plastics of below 60 microns. But it so happened that enforcement of this was not easy. It was not practical for the inspectors to go around measuring the thickness of the plastics. So later on in 2008 is when we had the first law banning polythene bags, the importation, the manufacture, the sale, the use of polythene bags in Rwanda. Which eventually extended to all packaging using polythene. So this was global and it was not looking at any other thickness. As long as it was polythene, this was not allowed. So we pushed on and it was not an easy journey, but later on we realized that we could make a lot of progress with the polythene, with the carry bags, packaging bags. But if we don't exactly tackle the whole chain of single-use plastics, still this was becoming more and more on the market. So in 2019, when we now revised the 2008 law to now, tackle the single-use plastics in plastic items in general. So this law prohibits the manufacture, the importation, the use and sale of plastic carry bags and single-use plastic items in Rwanda. Yeah, the experiences as we go on with educating, but also being consistent in the enforcement, the public is aware of the negative impacts of the use of plastics and the inappropriate handling of plastic waste. But this does not mean that it becomes easy for them to comply with the law. We still have resistance to change. And then environmental friendly, we now have the different alternatives like paper, like woven bags, which are made on the local market. And this came in as another, like source of employment, green jobs, because they have to fill the gap of what has been banned. However, we also see that the alternatives are more expensive than the plastics, because I mean plastics are easy and affordable and more convenient, but it is not as easy as it sounds, because the industries and manufacturers continue to tell us that this is not an easy shift for them, at least when it comes to profit margins and so on. The alternatives are still on the expensive side. So after the ban of single-use plastics and carry bags, this heavily contributed to the cleanliness of the city, especially the country, but especially urban areas. At some point, Kigali was awarded as the cleanest city in Africa. And we know this was a huge contribution came from the fact that we do not have plastic litter around the country. And this is a source of pride for the country, because at least you're able to walk on clean streets. Next, please. Yeah, and so without, global efforts, it is very hard to have this ban effected. Matter of fact, neighboring countries to Rwanda are just starting to ban the use of plastics and single-use plastics, but before they hadn't done that. And with the free movement of people and goods, it is very hard, especially when you have the porous borders. And then we have illegal business, because it's a rare commodity now. This comes in as an opportunity for smugglers. They keep coming in, because even when we have the ban, we still have these people who keep smuggling them. 2 days ago, we were receiving a whole batch around 2 tons of plastic carry bags, which were being smuggled into the country. But with a partnership with other enforcement agencies like the Rwanda National Police, these were grounded. But this is a common occurrence. But at least if the enforcement institutions are on board, then we manage to push on with the ban. So recycling capacity of the country is still limited, and if we don't actually think that recycling in itself is a solution, because only a small percentage is able to be recovered from the environment. Otherwise, even the capacity to recycle is still a little bit small, young or at infancy, but it is growing. We also have other types of plastics which come in the pretext of being alternatives to other types of plastics, like the oxo-degradable plastics, oxo-biodegradable plastics. They come in with all sorts of names, claiming to be degradable and environment friendly. These have been so hard for us to know how to manage, because when you look at it over a period of time, they tend to fragment as opposed to being biodegradable. So in the current law, in the revised law, we are actually talking about compostable plastics as the type of alternatives that we are accepting on the market, because this one is easy to be verified as opposed to the other oxo-degradable, oxo-biodegradable, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Yes, so the lessons we have learned is we wouldn't have moved even a year or an inch if we didn't have the political will. So political will is key if we want to really be able to manage plastics. And then awareness, sensitization, information sharing. This is across the board, across the institutions, across the industries, but even across countries. Like I was saying, we were struggling with these types of plastics, the oxo-degradable, biodegradable, and so on. But if we can have more information shared from the researchers to the different countries, industrialists, I think this can help countries to be able to effectively manage plastics. And then we also learned that the population is ready to change as long as the government is consistent with the message that they are giving them. It sounds hard to ban plastics, but with consistency of 10 years now, we see that the population can change if you continue giving them the same information, and then better off when you actually can be able to provide alternatives at a relatively affordable price. And then we see involvement. Everyone should be involved in this business. We cannot do it alone as the Environment Management Authority or alone as the environment ministries. We need the private sector to be with us. We need the industries. We need the enforcement agencies, like I was mentioning, the police, the customs office. We need everyone on board in order to be able to manage plastics effectively. And then we think it's actually more of a mindset change. The more we think we can't do without plastics, the more it becomes a harder issue. If we choose to think that we can do things different, this can be done. Before 2008, 2004, when we banned plastics, we thought it was very hard. Indeed, the first years were very hard for us to adapt. But now, as we speak, it's actually strange to see people using plastic carry bags. So the lessons learned here is we can change. Alternatives are there. If you look around, you can find alternatives to these plastics. Yeah, just wanted to show a little bit of pictures of the streets in Kigali. These were originally, we would have trees which have plastics all over them, but now we can have the true green color of trees around Kigali streets. We have alternatives in paper, and then we have garbage bins all over the streets which can be used. And then we have awareness materials that can be used to continually sensitize the population, showing them the issues around the negative effects of plastics. Now we took another bold step of actually decampaigning, for lack of a better word, the use of single-use water bottles. We all have reusable waters, we do refill, we have reusable coffee mugs, and it works. It simply needs people to actually change the way we're doing business. Next, please. Yeah, packaging of bread, for example, in the blue trays. This is how the bread looks like. This is in paper, wax paper. Doesn't look so attractive, but it serves the purpose. We still have the bread, which does not end up producing a lot of plastics. And then we have weaved baskets, different packaging materials, and they actually, at the end of the day, providing jobs to the regular Rwandan population. See the picture far left below. Those are ladies trying to weave the different items from fibers, which are, which are natural and will not have any other negative impacts. And on the left above, these are paper bags, which we use as carry bags, and they work. Next, please. Yeah, I think I was talking about recycling companies. This is the whole stack of plastics on the extreme left of my screen. There are so many, even when we banned the plastics, some different items, for instance, electronics, clothes, brand new clothes are imported wrapped in plastics. So what the recycling companies are doing are to help us to recover these from where they've been piled to actually produce other essential plastic items like garbage bins, because eventually we still have to live with some plastics, especially in essential essential sectors like in the medical waste handling. So these are recycled to produce the essentially needed plastic items. Next, please. Yes, I want to thank you for your attention. We don't say this is the right path to take, and I think there is no correct answer here, but what we should have all in common is to try and move away from the littering of plastics, because by now research has showed us the negative impacts it has. There is a lot of information. We are not going to be ready, more ready than we are now, but I think we just need to call our people to action, to just determine that we are going to make a difference and we are going to make a step. We shall meet challenges, but we get better at the challenges when we start tackling them one by one. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our experience.
Thank you very much, Juliet, for your excellent presentation. And I think we are all encouraged by this experience in your country. I have been in Kigali twice. It's a very clean city. You know, we love that. I also believe that other countries could follow you. We will have the last presentation from Mr. Peter Engel, and he is head of the CSR and the circular economy at Danske Return System. So I over to Peter to introduce.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to share our experience in Denmark. Yes, you can take the next slide, please, and then the next also. This one, yes. Yeah, great. So just I have to explain about the frame for our work. We are only operating in Denmark. And what we do is that we operate the Danish return and deposit system for one-way bottles and cans. So that is plastic bottles, glass bottles, and aluminium cans. And our job is to collect and sort the material when it comes back from shops and restaurants and so on, and to send it into recycling, and we recycle in a closed loop. And by that, we improve the environment, the climate, through this high quality recycling. So the next slide, please. Just a little about the organization and the scope of our operation. We were launched in the year 2000, so we have been here for 20 years. Before that, we also had a deposit system, but that was for refillable bottles, glass bottles. But by 2000, we also started to have one-way packaging for beverage in Denmark. We have the exclusive right to run the system. It is stated in this statutory order. So we actually have a law, legislation behind our operation. Although we are a private company owned by the main Danish breweries, but at the same time we have to be a non-profit organization. So it's a very special setup. We have a legislation that is specific for us. We have an exclusive right. We are a non-profit organization, but our exclusive right is evaluated every third year by an external independent party. And in our board of directors is both the breweries and also the main retailers. So that is the organization and the scope. And as I said, we're only operating in Denmark, but we are happy to share our experience both in Denmark, but especially also internationally. Yesterday I was talking in the Philippines. I was not there, but I was talking for people in the Philippines and other parts of Asia. So we very often are invited to share this experience. So you can take the next slide, please. So just to say, what do we have deposit on? It's beer, it's carbonated soft drink, iced tea, mineral water, and so on. So it is what is in the bottle or can that is demanding whether there should be a deposit on the bottle or the can. So you can take the next slide. this has developed over time. Yeah, just some figures here. You can see our income is from three main things. Everyone who puts a bottle or can with deposit on into the market, they have to pay a fee. And as you can see on the right side, the fee has been lowered since 2017 by 46%. That's a lot, and we have to do that all the time to be more effective. We have to find more effective way of running our system. Another income and a solid income is the sale of recyclable packaging. So we sell it to those who make it into new bottles and cans, and we get a fair good price. And then, of course, we have deposit on unreturned bottles and cans. That's also around a third. And you can then say, oh, then you are happy that you don't get this part of the deposit marked bottles and cans in. But we are not, and we are not allowed to do that, do it like that. And you can see also our income over the last years have increased. This is only the last 3 years. So yeah, you can take the next slide, please. So this is just a way to explain what are we actually doing. It's the collaboration with all stakeholders is very important for our success. So it's from those who produce the bottle or produce what is in the bottle and cans and put it into the market. It's a collaboration with the shops. The consumers are essential for our success. Without the consumers, we wouldn't be here. And again, the producers of the bottles and cans, not what's in them, but who actually make it the bottles into new bottles and cans. We also have a close cooperation with them. As a part of the legislation, if you are producing bottles and cans with anything in them that should be in the deposit system, you have to register it. You are obliged to be a part of the system. The shops have a mandatory take back of the bottles and cans, so that's also a part of the legal setup. We have to pick them up for free. It doesn't cost the shops and the restaurants and offices anything that we come. And then, as I said, we have a closed loop agreement with those who make it into new bottles and cans. They put up demands for us. It is high quality materials because it is food grade material. So I'll come back to that a little, but it shouldn't be made into anything else. It should be kept in that closed loop. But we also put up demands for those who receive our materials that they should be able to document what they have actually been using our material for. So it's a collaboration with all these main stakeholders. You can take the next slide, please. Yeah, it's just shortly. There are many ways the consumers can bring back restaurants, shops, reverse vending machines, and we also invented ourselves a bulk delivering stations we have around the countries, and we are further developing them over these years. So you can take the next slide, please. So we are certified corporate social responsibility according to a Danish standard that is equivalent to ISO 26000, and within that framework we put up annual goals for now for efficiency, circular economy, people and society, main issues within CSR. You can take the next slide, please. Of course, we work with the SDGs from next year. They are an integrated part of our company strategy towards 25, and especially 9, 12, and 13. But also we look into 4, 5, and 14 as the main SDGs for us. Next slide, please. Next slide. Just some key figures. I won't go into all of them, but you can see down here, more than 9 out of 10 bottles and cans are coming back to us. We know exactly how much is going into the market, and we know exactly how much is coming back to us. Actually, in last year, 2019, 92% of all bottles and cans in the deposit system came back and were made into new bottles and cans. For plastic alone, I'll come back to that, but it was 94%, so it's very high. And we are saving the climate, 150,000 tons of CO2 by recycling these bottles and cans compared to if they were made from virgin raw materials. So yeah, and yeah, you can see we have a lot of the consumers, 95% think that the deposit system and return system is a very good idea. So yeah, very important. You can take the next slide, please, and one more. Yeah, I have already been talking about this, but this is how we see ourselves. We are in the top pyramid of recycling plastic and other waste types because we are keeping it in this closed loop, bottle to bottle, can to can. If you start making, for instance, clothes out of plastic bottles, it will never be a plastic bottle again. So if you have food grade quality in your waste, then keep it in that loop. It's very important. And if you can make clothes into new clothes, but don't start making clothes out of plastic bottles or something like that. Don't mix up the different type of waste. That's important. So yeah, the design of the packaging is very important, and we work together. We have a good dialogue with those who are bringing the packaging into the market, but also we have this fee system. So the better the packaging is for recycling, the lower the fee. Actually, we have a zero fee on a half liter of aluminum can, because the cost of having the can through the system is equaled by the income we have of selling it, and that is the way to go. So that is really true circular economy. From our point of view, both from an environmental point of view, but also from economic point of view. So next slide, please. Yeah, let's talk plastic. So that's what. But now I have an idea about the setup. Hopefully, even though it's short. So you can see here, 94% of plastic bottles were returned last year. 8 out of 10 clear and light blue bottles were made into new bottles. So those clear and light blue bottles are the best to recycle. If you have more colored bottles, if you have a mixture of color, it is not so easy to use. It has to do, of course, with those who are recycling them and their technology, but also you cannot make a clear bottle out of a red bottle, for instance. So and that is in our system where the fees come in to actually not control, but to sort of push the market in the right direction. If the recyclers are getting better in recycling also color bottles, this will change. Yeah, I think that's enough for that slide for now. Some recommendations, maybe not for the UNDP alone, but for any country who would like to look into set up such a system like this, supported by a legal framework. It's very important. There should be demands both for those who are running the system and those who have to participate in the system. Who is doing what? That's essential for success. Also to have economic incitement for both producers and for retailers and consumers to actually contribute to be a part of this system. And then volume is essential. You have to have a big enough volume. That is why we have this. That is one of the reasons why we have this. A special possibility to be the only player in Denmark because we are a small country, only 6 million inhabitants in a very small area. So for that reason, we also need a strong logistic, but it's quite easy in Denmark. And I would recommend, without having any further experience in that field, but for larger countries, you should I think you should think about solutions for cities or for regions instead of for the whole country. Then I think it's possible to make a similar system, but you should include flexibilities when crossing borders. By that I mean, if you have people going from one part of the country to another, or from one city to another, and they bring along their plastic bottle, but they cannot get their deposit back because they came into another part of the country or another city. it won't be good for recycling. So, and we have the same in the northern part of Europe, especially. But yeah, people traveling from one country to another, then actually you have to take the bottle or can with you back home. A lot of people are, of course, not doing that, and then it just end up in the normal waste bin. And keep the plastic bottles and other food packaging in closed loop. Don't mix it with other waste. You have to keep a clean stream. And then sell the bottles directly to those who actually manufacture them into new bottles and cans. Don't go into the open market. You have to keep track of the bottles and cans that you want to recycle. Otherwise, it will be. But by this, you get the best price, and by this, you also ensure that it is not mixed with other type of waste. And then the last thing, information, I think, is very essential, both for everyone who's a part of the system, the consumers, but everyone who's within the system. That is important. Yeah, as Juliet was saying, the mindset is very important, also in a system like this. So yeah, the last slide. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention and for the opportunity to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for your presentation on how Denmark is addressing this plastic issue. But I think it's not only for plastic. You mentioned the key point is, sorting the different waste, bottle to bottle, can to can, and paper to paper. This is would be the way how we manage those different waste. I think it's interesting. Your recommendation also interesting is that we saw in big country also take action. It's beginning to take action, like India banned the single-use plastic. China also banned some type of the single-use plastic, but also in some cities like Shanghai and Beijing, they also introduced some kind of local policy, and more comprehensive and more detailed. So I think most of the country are considering in a different way, but we could learn from each other. Thank you. Thank you for all the panelists for your introduction. Now we are going to have an excited session about question and answers. I will over to my colleague Martin to help to facilitate that session. We already received a lot of questions, I think, from the participants.
Thank you very much, Xiaofang, and thank you to our panelists. We're over time and we have a lot of questions. So let's try to keep a dynamic Q&A, and maybe we can just do a round of questions and then give the floor to the panelists to respond. So if you allow me, I can just quickly read them and then give the floor to the panelists on the sake, for the sake of the time. So Guillermo had a question for Key and another question for Rodolfo. The first question is, the convention experts groups have any information about how microplastics are generated in the sea and inland? And I see that Key also exchanged some information in the chat box. Another question is from Elizabeth, which financial mechanisms exist to support countries in plastic waste management system implementing and how to access it? Just let me read another one really quickly. Again, Guillermo, for Rodolfo, how could it be influence of EPR policy on use reduction of certain plastics? And with this, I'm gonna stop here and give you the floor, to our panelists. Perhaps we can start with Key and then give the floor to Rodolfo.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I shared on the chat box the link to some of the reports that was produced by UNEP, and also in cooperation as part of a study that was done by GESAMP. I think some other person also mentioned that. There has been a lot of studies that has been reported but one of the major ones that has been considered is those that report on source fate, and effects of the plastics and microplastics. So indeed, and then OECD also had workshop, and they identified textiles and street runoffs like a tire abrasion as one of the key sources of microplastics into the environment. And with regard to the question on technical and financial resources, I also share the link to the identification of technical and financial resources that was conducted by UNEP, and their various financial resources mechanism has been identified, and the study indicates that the public fund has been one of the major available financial mechanism. Yes, I know that UNDP has JEF projects, small grant program, and so on. Of course, we also have Norwegian Development Cooperation Agency, NORAD, or other development agencies that are supporting a lot of projects around the world. Yeah, so but the study also shows that the funding from private sector is limited compared to public source. Yeah, I leave it here.
Thank you. Rodolfo, on EPR.
Yes, first I have to say that regarding microplastics, EPRs can help also when we talk with those that are in charge of wastewater treatment plants or wastewater treatment systems, because many microplastics are going directly to the sewage system and then to the ocean. And there are the need to of course enhance the wastewater treatment plants to control those kind of new pollutants. And there are many others, of course, chemicals that we are producing every year, and we are estimated that there are more than 1,000 new chemicals, and many of them are not regulated at all in many countries. That's why the OECD has this mutual acceptance data to simplify the authorization processes and procedures. So it is important not only when we talk about microplastics to consider solid waste management system, but also wastewater management systems. And EPR can help to control, of course, new plastics that are in the market. This is the best example. No? Perhaps you can see my mask. Who is controlling this kind of waste or this kind of product? Who is designing these to be recycled, and how to recycle these little things that now we can find in the streets, in the rivers, in the ocean, in the beaches. And we have to have, all the local authorities have to deal with this now. They have to apply this principle of extended producer responsibility at the local level, and see how to control not only this, but all these single-use plastic goods that are necessary for e-commerce, for health protection, or even for manage new drugs that are related with the pandemic. Is a good example of how to apply EPR in certain plastics. And there are more, of course. This is the other example. Well, let me try to show you here. This is the other example that we can use, because now e-waste is more and more important, and there are a lot of plastics in the packaging of e-products or electronic products, and we have to deal with them, and not all the countries are having the infrastructure to deal with them. In general, those are my comments or the answers, but we had a specific conference on this, and there are many materials in our website that you can download also. Thank you.
Thank you both. Just really quickly, another round of questions. Shada is asking if there is any research on the effectiveness of concrete sequestration of plastic. Anyone has access to any research and can share? I think this question can be answered through the chat box. So if you have any resources, please drop them into the chat box. Our colleague Leah is asking, what experience is there on the ground with promoting reuse and refill systems? For example, reusable to-go dishware for restaurants, cafes, food trucks. Such systems are emerging in the USA. Does anyone know of such systems in developing country cities? And just let me go with another one. George is asking Juliet, does the cleanliness resulting from the ban on the use of plastic apply also to the rural areas? We're always hear of Kigali. What is happening to the other cities? So I'm gonna handing over to Juliet first, and then opening the floor for our panelists on the experience of on-the-ground systems. Over to you, Juliet.
Thank you, Martin, for reading out that question. Yes, the cleanliness of the streets is actually all through the country, including the rural areas. It's not only Kigali, but also other secondary cities and indeed other rural towns. And it's not actually rocket science. It's about, you know, the plastic to be littered is not there. So if I'm using a reusable shopping bag, if I'm the little plastic that is there is also a campaign to collect it. We have a robust waste collection system, and because there are not so many, they actually end up being recycled, apart from a few type of plastics like the PET bottles, which is not yet so clear on how to handle them. Yes, we are crushing them and we have the powder of the PET bottles, but you also don't find them littered around because they are not as many. I think the littering becomes an issue when there is too much of this type of waste in the country. Yeah, I'm hoping I'm sharing enough information on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. And also you have a question from Sulan, and maybe you can just drop additional material to be shared afterwards on the campaign activities, you know, and the details of the campaign that you were mentioning. Just anything on the other question on the reuse and refill on the ground with promoting reuse and refill systems?
Maybe BRS Secretariat was implementing technical assistance activities in some of the countries, and we came across many traditional way of using containers, and especially, for example, in India, there is a traditional lunchbox system that is like the use and refills called Dabawala, where you have the container that the lunchbox service comes and you empty it, the container will be brought back and reused again. But during the COVID-19 time, it's getting really difficult. Also, we were trying to implement pilot testing of some of these good examples from tradition, but it has been some of the concerns over sanitation and cleanliness of refill and reuse. But I think that still the water refill system is being explored in Ghana currently. So there might be some of other examples that you can see from the reports. Thank you.
Thank you. And Peter, finally, we also want to hear from you. There are a lot of questions for you, and you have addressed some of them. The one is on how do you make recycled plastics competitive with virgin plastics, knowing that the very low cost of virgin plastic currently? Is it mostly through regulation? And I think you already answered the other question on how many times the bottles get recycled with this system. And finally, what challenges did you face from the beginning and now? Over to you, Peter. Peter, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, one of the main challenges we have in these years is to get back the last 8-10%. That is very hard work. We are very pleased with the 92%, but of course we would like to get to 93 or 95 or maybe 100% back. But that is very hard work because we are not even sure where the last percentages are. So where to look and who to address, but what we are working hard on that. And then yeah, we have a saying now in our next strategy period that every bottle and cans count. So that is what we are looking into as a main challenge.
Thank you. The questions keep coming. Solan, what do you recommend? Should we call the session now, or can we continue? What do you think?
I think, thank you so much, Martin and colleagues. I think we've already passed the time by how many minutes already? Also 24 minutes, already 24 minutes. Maybe it's time to close the conversation for the moment, but we can always continue the discussion through our online. Now we have a shared global email list called Plastics and Planet. And then Q&A can be also, we will ask the panelists to answer the questions, and we will post the answers on the SparkBlue and perhaps also distribute through different channels. And also the panelists' contact information is included also, right? So colleagues, please, let's continue the conversation and exchange of the information. So shall we close it then? And thank you, especially to the panelists and Xiaofang for a wonderful, insightful discussion we have today. And we look forward to continuing this intellectual exercise together with you. Our next webinar is on innovations for zero plastic waste cities and communities. It's scheduled on December 9th, Wednesday. And we look forward to your joining and continued discussion for the next session. So thank you, everyone. Maybe Martin ask everyone to show their face.
For sure.
And,
if you can turn on your cameras just to say goodbye. And with this, we are concluding our session today. Have a great morning, evening, afternoon, and please be safe, everyone. Thank you.
You too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Have a good day. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.